Don't you love it when things are both easier and more affordable? Like when the rain washes your car for you. Or like when you save up to 10% by bundling your renters and auto insurance with USAA. Bundle with USAA and start saving. Get a quote today.
Welcome back to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings in the industry you can regularly read over on the Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can listen to on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. He and I are recording this week's show on Sunday, April 13th, which happens to be Glen Keane's 71st birthday.
71 years young, as we like to say.
Well, yes,
right, Jim?
A 66-year-old old fart. Yes. I like the 71
yes.
years young. Okay, but tell my knees that. But anyway, Glen Keane, originally born back in 1954, son of cartoonist Bill Keane, the creator of Family Circle, went to CalArts, joined Disney Animation Studio September of 74. Look, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, I don't need to tell you which amazing characters came out of his Blackwing 602. That was the pencil that Glen, along with the 9 old men and Andreas Deja, used to use before everybody then switched over to drawing tablets and Cintiqs and that sort of thing. Anyway, Glen retires from Disney back in September of 2012. A year after that, he's made an official Disney legend. Over the past decade, Mr. Keane has won an Academy Award for that animated short that was based on Kobe Bryant's retirement poem, Dear Basketball. Glen also directed Over the Moon, that Chinese animated feature, which debuted on Netflix in 2020. And have you seen his most recent project? And I guess he's doing this with his son Max. Trash Truck.
Trash Truck?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got some very identifiably Glen Keanean designs, which I appreciate.
I agree. But also, what I love about this is what a great project when you're a grandpa to be doing, because little boys have this weird fixation with garbage trucks. But what a cool way to spend your retirement years, creating something like animated series that I bet his grandchildren absolutely love. But anyway, thanks to Glen for all those years of entertainment, all those great characters, and hope you have the happiest of birthdays. Anyway, we need to get to the news portion of this week's show and a very special interview that Drew and I did earlier this week. But before we do that, we have to acknowledge Fine Tuning's sponsor, and that is, of course, the DVC rental store. And if you're planning your next trip to Walt Disney World, you can save some serious scratch by renting DVC points through the DVC rental store. Imagine staying at a deluxe resort for a fraction of the cost. Total game changer. Oh, and if you already own or are thinking about joining the Disney Vacation Club, well, then be sure and check out the DVC resale market. They're the leader in the secondary market with over 70,000 satisfied members. Whether you're looking to buy or sell your DVC points, they make the process seamless. Okay, Drew, so we always start off the news section on this podcast by talking about the weekend's box office projections. And since on last week's Fine Tuning, we spent an awful lot of time talking about how well Minecraft did over its opening weekend. I want to say, 153 million in ticket sales just in North America. Well, we have to acknowledge that this past weekend, domestic ticket sales for that Warner Brothers Discovery film fell off by 48%, which is
actually really good.
That's what I wanted you to point out. Yeah. Studios will accept 60. Is that it? That they?
Yeah, I mean, 60 is not great. I mean, anything under 50 is really a home run, and this added, I think, another 80 million over the weekend.
It did.
Yeah, it's topped 500 million worldwide, which is just incredible. So
9 days.
Yeah, this
they
is a
did
big
that
hit.
in 9 days.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, that's not NISA 2 money, which that Made in China animated feature we've discussed on previous editions of Fine Tuning. That came out January 29th. Sequel to 2019's NISA has since gone on to sell 1.8 billion worth of tickets worldwide. Now, mind you, most of those ticket sales were in country. To date, NISA 2 has only sold 2.8 million worth of tickets in North America. I bring that up because of what's been going on with the tariffs this week, and especially even as Mr. Trump is putting a pause on many tariffs for 90 days, there's no other way to describe this. The trade war with China. He keeps jumping the tariffs, and China in turn jumps its tariffs, and then talks about how it's going to do things like, earlier this week they said they were going to prevent all Hollywood movies from being shown in that country, and now that's changed to some. Is that correct? Or
yeah, I mean, it's hard to keep up with this madness. I mean, it goes back and forth every day. I think that that they were the amount of Hollywood movies were going to be fewer in China, but then I don't know. He seems to be changing his mind every other second.
And this is the thing, that if you're a company like Disney or Universal and you're looking at the business that NISA 2 just did in China, and the thinking is that, remember what was it in 2009 after the original Avatar came out? The very first 3D movie that came out after that was, Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland. And it did effectively half the business that Cameron's 3D movie did, which, again, that was over $1 billion, right?
Yep. And another big hit over there was How to Train Your Dragon, Jim, which there is another How to Train Your Dragon opening in just a few weeks. So I'm sure Universal is loving this insanity. Yeah.
And not to mention, remember, Elio comes out on June 20th, and then on August 1st is Bad Guys 2, and the other part that's concerning about this story is that when Trump got asked about this in the Oval Office when they let the press corps in, his response was, I've heard of worse things, which you have to assume people out in Hollywood just did not want to hear.
I mean, the business out here is really ailing, and this is not helping anything, and it's going to be really frustrating too as the year goes on, and materials are going to get harder to come by, and I hate to tell this to our physical media family, Jim, but all of those are pressed either in Mexico or elsewhere overseas. So, it's going to be a real interesting time, let's say. But
and not to put too fine a point on it, but to circle back to James Cameron, I forget which of the trades shared this, but they were doing a breakdown of how much Hollywood films had actually earned in China. And for example, the second Avatar movie, The Way of Water, made $247 million just in China.
Yeah.
And the notion that potentially that territory could be cut off from the next Avatar movie, Fire and Ash. Did I get the name of that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Christmas this year.
Christmas this year. So, again, a situation worth watching. By the way, though, we haven't gotten to this weekend's big bit of animated-related news at the box office, and that was in the number 2 position behind a Minecraft movie, which, again, Drew just pointed out, 80 million stateside. The number 2 position was held by a full-length animated feature. This one, entitled The King of Kings, came from Angel Studios and was based on a Charles Dickens short story, The Life of Our Lord. And Kind of an interesting side story about Life of Our Lord. Wasn't published, Drew, till 1934, 64 years after Charles Dickens had passed away in June of 1870. But evidently, this story was a family favorite, something that would get read in the Dickens household every holiday season. And further little digging here, Life of Our Lord was written in 1846, around the same time that Dickens was working on David Copperfield. And he supposedly deliberately wrote this retelling of the Gospel of St. Luke in a simplistic style, to then make this version of the life of Jesus Christ more accessible for his own children. Anyway, I don't know exactly how Angel Studios gets the rights to animate the life of our Lord, but this since retitled property, The King of Kings, they get that animated, and a particularly smart bit of programming, they get this full-length animated feature out on 3,200 screens around North America the weekend before Easter, where it then does, well, the initial box office estimates are, 19.5 million? Which is a really...
Yeah, it's a big hit. I mean, it's told with a animated Charles Dickens wraparound story.
Okay.
Which kind of reminds me of the crazy Will Vinton Mark Twain movie where he goes to hell.
The Adventures of Mark Twain. I love that movie.
Yes.
I was, again,
yes,
one of the only people on the planet who loved that movie, but I love that movie. So.
Yes, well, that's when Jim was taking recreational medication, let's just say that. So it's kind of got that vibe to it, but it's got a great cast: Oscar Isaac, Pierce Brosnan. There, I think there were 3 religious movies in the top 10 this week, because 2 of the chosen movies were also in the top 10. So
interesting. Okay.
God bless the box office, Jim, is what I'm saying there.
Well, and also worth noting here that this is the best ever opening for an animated Bible story in Hollywood history. It bests the $14.5 million worth of tickets that DreamWorks Animation's The Prince of Egypt sold over its opening weekend back in December of 1998. And by the way, over the past 10 years, several stage versions of that Academy Award-winning film, and people forget that back in 1999, The Prince of Egypt actually won an Oscar for Best Song with Stephen Schwartz's When You Believe, and and Katzenberg being Katzenberg. Didn't he get Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston to both do recordings of that?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Underline, circle, and indent. All right. That Jeffrey never missed a trick. What's interesting is as we're talking about the stage versions of Prince of Egypt, there was one presented in London's West End back in 2020. It was filmed live by the Universal Pictures Content Group, and now can be seen in its entirety over on Apple TV if you're curious. And again, I bring up musicals for the stage that are based on animated properties because Boop, the musical, opened in New York City last week on Saturday, April 5th at the Broadhurst Theater on West 44th Street. This production, and you might remember I was talking about it a year or so back, tried out in Chicago in late 2023. It's directed and choreographed by Jerry Mitchell. Got a somewhat middling review in the New York Times, but a lot of positive reviews from other media outlets. So this is one of those moments, Drew, where getting some Tony nominations would really be helpful. And those will be announced live on May 1st. And Boop, the musical, is not only hoping for some nominations, they're hoping for a few wins that would then, in theory, keep this show, which, by the way, was produced with cooperation of Fleischer Studios, which, by the way, Drew, has a great website. If you'll need to check it out, it's fleischerstudios.com. some Tony wins would help keep the show running into the summer, which is when tourists and international visitors used to flood into New York and buy Broadway tickets. But again, we were just talking about the tariffs and how people, especially Canadians, are not necessarily coming south. I wonder if that historic pattern is going to hold in 2025 and beyond. Anyway, speaking of the summer, this past week we also got a trailer for the animated Predator, Killer of Killers, which will be debuting on Hulu on June 6th. And Predator, Killer of Killers comes...
Very disappointed, Jim, that you missed the transition from King of Kings to Killer of Killers. You know, that seems like that was an easy setup, but listen.
Hey, you know,
I'll take what I can get.
I don't always go for the low-hanging fruit. Okay, anyway, Predator, Killer of Killers comes from Dan Trachtenberg, the director of Prey, which was, I'm going to say, just a pretty spectacular Predator prequel, which debuted on Hulu back in August of 2022. And where this gets interesting is, well, Predator, Killer of Killers, which is really an animated anthology film. It shows a predator doing battle with a fierce warrior from 3 specific eras in human history: a Viking raider, a ninja back in feudal Japan, and then a pilot during World War II. But again, as I was saying, where this gets interesting is Trachtenberg has been working on 2 Predator films for 2025. Again, we have the animated Killer of Killers, which debuts on Hulu again on June 6th. And then we have the live-action Predator Badlands, which arrives in theaters on November 7th. You got to see Prey, right? Back in the day.
Oh, yeah. I loved Prey.
Yeah. I mean...
Yeah. Dan and I are buddies.
Oh, are you?
And I think he did a spectacular job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the animated movie, too, I want to tell our animation folks out there, some of it was done by Fortiche, who did all of Arcane. So get ready for that. It's going to be pretty spectacular.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did I also hear Third Floor is involved with this?
Yeah, Third Floor was involved. One of the directors from Third Floor is co-directing. And yeah, Third Floor, you know, it's cool that they're sort of branching out to feature animation because they are mostly known as a previs company. So they will sort of like block out action scenes and other sequences for big animated and live action features. So very cool that they are doing full on animation here, and it looks pretty great. I'm really excited. But yeah, Badlands is Thanksgiving, and this is right around the corner. So
no.
Buckle up, Jim.
Cannot wait. Okay, folks, this brings us to the end of the news portion of this week's Fine Tuning. And when we get back, Drew and I are going to talk with Neil O'Brien, whose new book, After Disney, takes a close look at the production of Disney's troubled animated feature from the mid-1980s, The Black Cauldron. But first, this.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
This episode is brought to you by the Toyota Grand Highlander. From daily routines to life-changing adventures, the Toyota Grand Highlander is spacious, powerful, and ready to take on life's grand challenges. Advanced safety features and innovative technology give you confidence for whatever life throws at you. And it's available in a hybrid Nightshade Special Edition, which includes sophisticated gloss black exterior accents and 20-inch black alloy wheels. Learn more at toyota.com/Grand Highlander. Toyota, let's go places.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
And we're back. Mr. Taylor and I now have the pleasure of welcoming Neil O'Brien to Fine Tuning. Neil is an award-winning journalist and producer who has worked for NBC News for over 2 decades now. Mr. O'Brien has produced hundreds of hours of television over the course of his career, and his work with NBC News specials has been honored with 4 Emmys, a Peabody, and an Edward R. Murrow Award. But Drew and I aren't talking to Neil tonight because of his work in television, but rather because of a book that Mr. O'Brien just wrote. And by the way, just realizing you two guys have something in common. You both have new books out and have spent the past month or so promoting them. Mr. Taylor's made stops at the Grove in L.A., and your Gallery Nucleus thing, we're recording...
We're recording on Wednesday. It's on Saturday.
All right.
It's sold out, Jim. You're not in town on Saturday, are you?
No. In fact,
next weekend. Okay.
We're nailing down the plane ticket for my trip out for FanFest, but we'll talk about that later. But again, Drew was at Gallery Nucleus in the past tense for this show with Amphibia creator Matt Braley.
That's right.
Neil, you were just up at the Walt Disney Family Museum at the Presidio, right?
Correct. Yeah, this past weekend.
Okay, but that not your first time there. So, what do you think of the museum?
That's great. I mean, the Presidio's beautiful. Mm-hmm. We were there on a gorgeous weekend, and the museum, if anything, it's you feel Walt all around you, so it's pretty cool.
And Drew, you've been up there a couple times at this point, right?
I've been up there once. We were staying at a hotel at the Presidio, which I cannot recommend enough, but also can't remember the name of.
The Lodge?
So, yeah.
Okay.
One day my wife had a work thing to go to, and I said, I'm going to go to the Walt Disney Family Museum. So that's what I did, and it was wonderful.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I think I stayed at that hotel.
Now, Neil, you were there speaking at the Walt Disney Family Museum in support of After Disney, Toil, Trouble, and the Transformation of America's Favorite Media Company, which Post Hill Press published back on March 4th. And by the way, folks, the Audible version of this book just became available a week or so back on March 25th. And also, since Fine Tuning is an animation news podcast, I guess we should mention that the audio version of After Disney is read by Jonathan Todd Ross, who anime fans will recognize as the voice of Marek Ishtar and Yami Marek from Yu-Gi-Oh! And by the way, again, totally unsolicited, earlier tonight I was recording some Epic Universal podcasts with Eric Hersey, and it turns out just this past weekend he'd gotten a copy of After Disney when he was listening to it in the car when he drove up to his brother's 50th birthday celebration, and just could not say enough nice things about the book. Really enjoyed it and thought Jonathan did an especially good job with the reading. So
that's great. It's great to hear.
So, all right. So again, you spoke of the Walt Disney Family Museum. What was your talk about, Neil? I mean, obviously, besides doing a bit of promotion for After Disney.
Yeah, so it's kind of the illustrated version of the book. Obviously, focusing not just on Ron Miller, who's a key subject, but also on the Black Cauldron, which is a production I sort of used as a through line to get readers through the 20 years or so after Walt's death. It's celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. And for the first time, it's being actually shown at the museum multiple times this month in April. So it was an opportunity to talk about that film and show people who have read the book, some of the people who are featured in the book in a presentation.
Wow.
Ron Miller and the Black Cauldron. Two things that really get asses in seats, Neil. I'm glad that you gave the people what they want.
It's so funny you say that.
You know what? I will say, at the museum, Ron is well loved. And,
yeah, he did what he could. I think Ron doesn't get enough credit for some things.
Well,
he developed Touchstone, right? That was
exactly. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
More to the point, though, it's just kind of startling, given that the Walt Disney Family Museum has been around for 16 years at this point, and they're only just now getting around to showing the Black Cauldron. Well, you mentioned this is the through line through After Disney. But what made you decide to settle on that as to make it such a big part of the book?
Because it was one production that really, the first time the company encounters it is right after Walt's death, 1968. The company acquires it a few years later. The Nine Old Men, Walt's veteran animators, they are sort of in love with this project at first. And then, as it sort of goes through its story development, you get Don Bluth in there, then you get the Cal Arts kids coming in, you get Bluth leaving. Throughout all of this, all the sort of second generation of Disney greats coming through, the Black Cauldron is the project that is sort of on the horizon with this great big promise. And then with the contours of the production being that when Ron Miller leaves and then the new regime comes in, the film gets edited within an inch of its life. And so I just knew that it was like a good story. There are a lot of, the contours of that story are good, and it would sort of simplify in many ways, getting you through this 20-year history in, just a few hundred pages.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, is your conceit that it was a better movie before it was edited, or it was just a different movie before it was edited?
Well, having seen some of the footage that was edited from the film, it is a richer movie, right? Like, it's the same movie. They didn't cut out like whole chunks of the movie, but they cut scenes a lot. They chopped up tons of scenes to get 12 minutes out when Katzenberg came in with Eisner in 84. He screened the movie. He said, get 12 minutes out of this. Roy E. Disney and producer Joe Hale, who passed away earlier this year, they're sort of forced to cut footage out. And then when they don't cut out enough, Katzenberg comes in and even gets in the edit room himself to get the footage out. So having seen the last third of the movie as intended, in pencil form, rough, with sound, with dialogue, but still rough animation, it's just a richer movie, a little more emotional, a little more dramatic, still the same movie ultimately, but just a little richer.
And it was sort of the last movie, and Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, with segment directors in the kind of old style of the animated movies before, people like George Scribner or Ron and John kind of took over in a more singular way directing these movies.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah. I mean, Ted Stevens and Rick Rich, and at one point Art Stevens before he leaves,
right,
are sort of the directors on the film, and each one sort of has they actually clashed a fair bit on different parts of the film with different visions, but they were sort of the team that was putting things together.
What could go wrong? Right,
what
Jim?
could go wrong?
Okay. Toward that end, though, can you tell us? I mean, again, you there's only a handful of people on the planet left who actually saw the work in progress version of the way Black Cauldron was supposed to have gone into theaters back when Ron Miller was still calling the shots at Disney. Can you talk about how you got the opportunity to do that?
Yeah, so I started this project a really long time ago, 17 years ago. At the time, it was sort of the golden age of DVDs, where every movie, good, bad, and in the middle, were getting special features and all this behind the scenes stuff. And so I just started exploring the Black Cauldron because, like a lot of the films in the Miller era, some of them got treatment on DVD, but many did not. So I reached out to Joe Hale, started talking to him. I talked to Ron Miller in that time period. And then I went to visit Joe Hale in 2009 at his house. And on the shelf was this VHS tape that said TBC work reel. I think it said 9.1 to end. And I said, "What's that on your shelf?" And so just by seeing it and asking, it was actually at the end of the visit that I saw it. I was then able to see at least the last third or so of the film as intended again in rough form, and it just plays a little bit richer than the chopped up version. Joe Hale had told me at the time that I think he was more focused on making sure that part of the film was preserved. He wished he had sort of done it for the whole film, but he just did it for that last sort of third of the film. Anyway, he claims in some vault, or he claimed the whole movie exists as intended, but that has yet to see the light of day.
Neil, it'd be a real shame if that ended up on YouTube. Nobody saw nothing, all right? It's a perfectly legitimate last reel of Black Cauldron, you know.
Well, all right. So we've talked about how the project ended. Well, what fascinates me is how this initially came on Disney's radar. You mentioned, 1968? But what's interesting about that is Disney passed on it, right?
So keep in mind, and you guys have read this memo on this show. Roy O. Disney almost shuts down feature animation in 1966 following Walt's death. And once they get the success of the Jungle Book, and then a couple, Aristocats is in production. Veteran storyman Otto Englander is sort of tasked with finding new material to keep them going after the Aristocats, and he comes across the Chronicles of Prydain books, 5-book series, fantasy series written by Lloyd Alexander, and in these books he sees the same kind of promise that you had with the first 5 Disney Golden Age films of Snow White, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Bambi, Dumbo. Dumbo, Bambi, wrong order. Anyway, so he sends it to the story department for analysis. This female screenwriter there, Inez Koch, she reads the book. She suggests that it's not really to her liking. She doesn't really understand why you'd move forward with this sort of fairy tale where the prince doesn't win the princess in the end, which in her mind is how all good fairy tales end. And the princess vowing never to get married, and instead stay with the pig keeper. And, she just didn't understand what was the appeal of this story. And this was the 3rd book in the series. Disney eventually, after the 2 of them, unfortunately pass away, a few years later, Disney acquires the 5-book series, but focuses on the first 2 books to adapt the Book of 3 and the Black Cauldron. They bring Lloyd Alexander, the author, out to Burbank to work on the film, work on treatments, before he decides that he can't quite crack the writing room at Disney, and decides he's going to go back to Philadelphia.
Got it. You just a moment ago mentioned Fantasia, and what's interesting in this window of time, Fantasia gets re-released to theaters and finds a whole new audience, and the college student crowd, and those who enjoy their medications. I guess that's a polite way of putting it. And what I love about after Disney is you have such a great eye for detail, because this is the same window of time that they're working on the Aristocats, right? And there's a decision made that, well, the psychedelic crowd seems to really enjoy Fantasia, so we need to make Aristocats psychedelic as well, so that's why we get that Tiffany lamp effect in the film.
So, and I don't. Keep in mind, Hollywood's changing, the country's changing. 1967, Variety's top words for that year are conglomerate and psychedelics. In the story, in the sweatbox notes for Aristocats, yes, there's reference to incorporating psychedelic colors, both in the scene you're talking about, but also at the end when they do sort of the reprise of Everybody Wants to Be a Cat at the finale. So, yes, the word psychedelic is put in the sweatbox notes. I don't necessarily have it because of the success of Fantasia, but clearly Fantasia draws in a whole different kind of audience than the typical family crowd that goes to see Disney films. It's, there's lots of news articles at the time that it's attracting stoners. Not everybody who saw it was a stoner, but yeah. So they incorporate psychedelic colors into Aristocats while that's in production.
Aristocats, the ultimate head movie, Jim. That's right. Yeah. So edgy, such an edgy piece of entertainment.
No, I mean, again, I love details like that. Just never heard that about that movie, and now I can't look at it without thinking, got to make this appeal to the kids.
I mean, the great thing about Black Cauldron though is that it's so funny because by the time the movie's coming out, the 9 old men are in a revolt. Don Bluth has left. Like, I found a New York Times story from a few years ago where they were like openly criticizing the young animators at the studio. That must have been an appeal to you too, that it's so hilariously kind of went off the rails in that time as well.
Well, I think what, there's a lot of frustration upon Bluth's departure because there was a lot of bad blood at that time in 1979. You have the Rat's Nest, you have the Bluth team, people with competing visions about how to move animation forward, right? And the kinds of stories they want to tell. And then when Bluth leaves, Ron Miller loses a third of the animation department basically with him. And they're really worried about losing more people. So I think they let a lot of things slide. At the same time, I think a lot of that created sort of a ethos among the young artists that once they buckled down after Black Cauldron, that sort of, crazy, funny energy sort of coursed through them and into the films after that. But a lot of that was sort of incubated at Disney because they were afraid of losing more talent after Bluth. And they let a lot of things slide. There's a lot of zany antics going on at that time. And Joe Hale's pulling out his hair because he can't really, criticize the young kids or force them to do their enough footage in a timely manner.
Don Hahn told me a story one time where Joel Hale was kind of looking out over the animators, and he said to Don Hahn, "Do you think these guys are on dope?" And Don Hahn went, "No, what are you talking about? Of course not. Everything's fine, So
yeah.
Well, but at the same time, toward what you just mentioned about the fear of talent walking out the door, I mean, what I love is the dichotomy of, Tim Burton's there and absolutely miserable working on, what was it? Fox and the Hound. They had him animating Vixie and he was ready to kill himself. But he then gets moved over and he's doing development on Black Cauldron. But don't they have him in a room with Andreas Deja?
Yeah, the two of them are developing the central characters, the look of the film. Tim, very distinct style, is already emerging, has emerged. When, the big MoMA exhibit from a few years ago that has since traveled the country, they sort of zeroed in on his Black Cauldron days as sort of a turning point in his artistic career, because he's really left to go wild for about a year, coming up with all these really imaginative designs. I know there's designs around the witches and the chair, them turning to chairs that I think Musker tried to preserve, even when the other directors didn't want any of the Burton style in there. But after about a year, Joe Hale had told me that he basically went to Ron and said, if you go with the Burton approach or you go with the Andreas Deja approach, and Andreas Deja is also a young artist at the time, and the Disney style comes so naturally to him, even at that early time in his career. So you have a very traditional Disney look that you can go with, or you have this really new kind of, now we know it as like a Tim Burton style, but back then it was just this really out there art, and they ultimately go more for the Andreas Deja look and feel. There are some art that you can find on the internet of when Andreas tries to sort of adapt Tim's style, and then there's also some stuff of Tim where he's tried to adapt Andreas' style, but it's just so different. It's like night and day, the kind of stuff they're doing, and it's hard to really mesh those styles. But it's very important for Tim Burton's development, for everything he would become, to have had this year. At the same time, his friends talk about how hard it was on him when management basically says, we're not going to go with your stuff. They told me some stories about things that they heard were said to him that really sort of hurt him. Although he talks kind of in mixed tones about the time period.
What's interesting, again, they won't go forward with what he designed for Black Cauldron, but there was still a recognition of this guy's a talent. So, they give him and Rick Heinrich money to do Vincent, and then there's Frankenweenie in there. Disney recognized that he was a talent. It just, they didn't know what to do with him.
That's right, Jim. They recognized him. He was a talent, so talented that they would show his Hansel and Gretel one time on Halloween evening.
All right. So, look, folks, obviously, Drew and I are fans of After Disney, largely because of all of the great work that Neil has done on this book, all this amazing research. And again, I have to admit, I do love the two narrative threads of this, following Ron Miller's career coupled with Black Cauldron. It sounds like from the outside it should work, but it's a wonderful book. And as Eric just talked about, or just shared, the audio version, it is a great listen. So I guess what we're saying here is, just want to remind you, After Disney is out there on bookshelves from Post Hill Press. But if you want to listen to the audio version, head on over to Audible. And beyond that, Neil, just thanks for making the time tonight to talk to Drew and myself.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Cool.
Thanks, Drew.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
Anything else you need to plug? Anything coming down the pike? I hope the next book is not in 17 years. Yeah.
I don't know if I have another book in me after 17 years. But...
Fair enough. But you can always come on the show if you need to
I appreciate it.
Chat about anything. We'd love to have you back.
Hey, congrats on your book.
Oh, thanks.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Okay, so we're back now, folks, and thanks again to Mr. O'Brien. We, by the way, recorded our interview with Neil back on Tuesday, April 8th, which is a week before this podcast will be posted on Tuesday, April 15th. In between those two dates, though, Mr. Taylor and Amphibia creator Matt Braley had their event at Gallery Nucleus, which celebrated the publication of The Art of Amphibia. How did that go, Drew?
It was great. I just saw on Twitter that somebody has recorded the whole thing on YouTube, so you can look for it there. Oh. Very dedicated fan base. Cool. But no, it was really great. Ian Worrell, who was the production designer for season 1, was there, as well as Joe Sparrow, who is a freaking amazing creature and character designer who designed stuff on all 3 seasons of the show. Just a blast. Everybody was so lovely. And yeah, it was just, we had a great time. We were signing away, Jim. I'll tell you that.
That is so nice to hear. Okay. Well,
yes.
Cool. All right. And by the way, if you enjoy the stories that Drew shares here, I want to remind you there is, of course, Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast that Drew does with his equally talented co-host, Charles Hood. And I just saw that The Final Reckoning will be, well, not holding its world premiere at Cannes, but be doing an out-of-competition...
I think it actually is the world premiere.
Is it really?
Yeah, the world premiere will be at Cannes, out of competition, followed by premieres all around the world, Jim. As you know, this is going to be a whole global tour.
I don't know.
So we'll be in the mix somewhere. I don't think we'll be at Cannes, but we'll be on the trail for sure.
Cool.
So yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So just to review here, though, the Cannes screening is Wednesday, May 14th. The film itself opens in theaters, at least here in North America, on May 23rd. And you may be at one of the things around the globe, right?
Yes, look out for me on a red carpet in some far-flung location. Yes,
well, look, I don't get to do things that are as cool as Drew Taylor does. I just sit here at my dining room table, in the woods of southern New Hampshire and churn out podcasts. And speaking of which, though, we do have a number of them that we do here. We have, of course, Disney Dish that I do with Len Testa. There's the Epic Universal podcast that I do with Eric Hersey, who produces a lot of the shows here at Jim Hill Media. There's also the Disney Merch podcast that I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren. In addition to that, there is Looking at Lucasfilm with Brian Gahn, and in fact, he and I are probably going to be recording a new episode of that in a day or so. And in addition to that, we host Manufacturing the Magic, which is a theme park history podcast that Noah and Shelley Valladolid do, and that's worth checking out. And then, of course, there is Disney Unpacked, the Patreon project that Len and I do with Jim Schul, Imagineer with the Disney Company for over 30 years. And by the way, we just recorded an exclusive show for Patreon where Len and Mr. Schul and I discuss Universal Studios Great Britain, which is the project that actually preceded Universal Studios UK, the thing that got officially announced last week. Kind of an interesting story. And later this month, we'll also be posting a brand new Disney Unpacked that then takes a look at how the characters from Pixar's Monsters, Inc. have been used in ride shows and attractions at the Disney parks. And speaking of the Disney parks, our producer, as I just mentioned, Eric Hersey, is down in Orlando right now. And if you see he and his lovely bride in the parks, please say hello. And beyond that, Mr. Taylor and I want to thank David Gray for doing such a good job on the production side of this podcast, especially this week, stitching together interview from the other day. So beyond that, please do Drew and I a favor. Head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this show as well as Light the Fuse. And as we head out the door here, Drew, social media, where can the nice folks find you?
At Drew Tailored, like a tailored shirt, on Instagram and Twitter mostly. Why am I still on Twitter, Jim? Why am I letting this rule my life? I don't know, but yeah.
Bad habits are hard to break. Okay, same thing. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Jim Hill Media and over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. Final note, folks, as we head out the door here, we have been talking up Anna Made. I hate that name. The Art of Animation, this auction that Sotheby's is staging with the help of Asifa Hollywood, with the idea that funds that are raised from this event will then go on to help over 70 families that were impacted by the wildfires in Southern California earlier this year. And by the way, we finally have an actual location for this auction, which is Sotheby's, New York. They're set up at 1334 York Avenue. We also know that the pieces that are coming up for bid will be on display. The downside is they went on display this past Friday, April 11th, and they will be on display through today, as in the day this podcast goes live, Tuesday, April 15th. Which I know isn't a lot of advance notice, especially if you're looking to see these pieces in person before bidding. Now, mind you, the actual Animate, the Art of Animation auction begins on Wednesday, April 23rd, and then runs a full week through April 30th, and you can bid on these pieces online. And want to stress here that every studio of size in town stepped up. We're talking the Disney Company, Warner Brothers, DreamWorks Animation, Sony Pictures Animation, Pixar, and Paramount. They have all donated pieces to be auctioned off. And among the films and TV shows that will be represented at Animade are Snow White, The Simpsons, Inside Out, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, The Wild Robot, Beauty and the Beast, and Avatar. That said, just a warning that this auction, and I want to start saying the proceeds are going to a really good cause, is likely to get pricey. The pieces being offered at Animade, the Art of Animation auction, are being offered with no reserve. And the initial estimates on some of these one-of-a-kind things range from $500 to over $25,000, and I think that's on the low side, Drew. Right? What these eventually going to go for? You think?
Listen, Jim, you don't really need a house or an apartment to live in, but you need some of this art. So that's what I say.
Okay. And by the way, you also need a copy of The Art of Amphibia. I'm just saying. But anyway.
Yes, that's true.
On behalf of Mr. Taylor, thanks for listening to this week's Fine Tuning, and we will be back soon.